Okay, I thought I would go ahead and get on here and read a little bit more of my book. My mom and dad stopped by for a little bit. They hadn't been over to the house in a while, so they came over to do something, to grab something, and then we all ended up kind of visiting and hanging out for a bit. Gave me a chance to kind of regain my composure and catch my breath. And I thought I would go ahead and do part two of this story that I'm reading that I wrote back in 2015 or 2017, 2 years after my diagnosis in 2015. And remember, when I come across a quote that I don't know who said it, I'm just going to say anonymous before I read it. So I'll read the last couple of sentences so it all kind of comes together more. A terrible thought approached. I was in the back of the ultimate kidnapper's van. My vision was now the farthest thing from my mind, my paranoia on point. Anonymous. Mental illness is not a choice, but recovery is. While my mom was here, this is not the story, so hold on one second. While my mom was here, I showed her the ending of the first video, and she had a different memory of the dates. She thinks that I went into, and I would trust her memory on the dates way more than I would trust mine. But I know it was around April Fool's Day. But she was pretty sure that I went to my local hospital the evening of March 31st, and then I went to the psych hospital after midnight. Well, like into April 1st, and that was when I got into that ambulance, and they drove me to a psych hospital for a 72-hour hold across town. So my dates are off here because this next sentence of the next paragraph says, I arrived at the mental hospital around 2:30 in the morning on the second day of April, which would have been the first. And I trust my mom's memory on that more than mine. But then again, I wrote this. This was where my head was at the time. So the dates don't entirely matter, but they're close enough that it's kind of, it's good to clarify it, but it doesn't really make or break the story. So I arrived at the mental hospital around 2:30 in the morning on the second day of April, first day of April. I use the word hospital loosely throughout my story, as neither of the two hospitals I sought care at provided me with the level of quality treatment or care I believe an accredited hospital should. This admittance to a psych ward reset the panic button on my mind yet again, and I immediately went into another manic episode, another desperate attempt to disentangle or think my way out of the situation. Believe it or not, but I absolutely believed at that moment that I could do it. I followed a hospital worker from an ambulance through a hallway to a hallway before entering a common room that was locked in all directions from the outside. In the hours to come, and as a result of my erratic behavior, I would become the key character in an over-medicated, isolated, persistently ignored, and completely stuck nightmare. In the common room, I looked over at a guy sitting in a chair nearby, a blanket wrapped around him, anguish on his face, and I whispered, "Want to know a secret? I'm going to get myself out of here." I vaguely remember this. He shot me a revolted look, got up without a word, and walked away. I knew I was acting weird, and the look he blasted at me didn't bother me one bit. I was getting out. This was a puzzle to be solved, and damn it, I was going to solve it. Anonymous. The cure for pain is in the pain. I walked into a room to find two twin-size mattresses in small wooden frames set directly on the cold, hard floor. A person was asleep in the farthest one from the door, and the other bed was naked, aside from the pillow at the head and the unmade sheets and a blanket folded at the foot. There was a desk with a glass partition on the other side of the common room, a sign taped to the window of the glass that said "knock after hours." I left my room, walked over to it, and began knocking with confusion. I do remember the first lady that approached me at the desk that first night. She was actually helpful. I tried to explain to her that I didn't know what to do with the sheets on my bed. I was so discombobulated that I couldn't even figure out how to make my own bed. My puzzled mind working so obviously against me. After she observed my struggle through my tears, she kindly offered to do it for me, and that would be the first of two kindnesses I can call to mind from my 168-hour stay. I wasn't allowed anything, not even my shoelaces. What kind of place was this? Where was I exactly? Sorry, I get dry when I cry and talk and I'm fighting stuffy. All right. Anonymous. Wear your tragedies as armor, not shackles. On day 1, I watched my first roommate drop her pants and urinate on the floor right next to my bed, silently gawking and scowling at me the entire time. I remember that. On day 2, my second roommate screamed at me for taking the Bible provided by the hospital from her nightstand as mine had been misplaced. Also on day 2, my tongue had swelled so badly from the medications that I couldn't talk. I should mention I didn't even know that I was on any medication. I didn't know I was taking any medications. My tongue so swollen that I was unable to speak one single clear word to my parents when they came to visit. Because I didn't know I was drugged, my mind was a total blur and I was completely terrified. I slurred to my parents that I didn't want my husband to see me like this. And after his first visit on the previous evening, he honored my psychosis and didn't return for another visit. I regret that. I was out of my mind. There's an excuse, but I still regret it. Something I kick myself for every day. I've since told him that if I ever say that again, to disregard it at all costs. He agreed and made me that promise. I was introduced to a psychiatrist on day 2, a 40-something-year-old man with curly hair who spent maybe 10 minutes with me, and I never saw him again, even upon my requests. I was forced to take 4 to 6 different pills every few hours, and when I say forced, I mean forced. I had to take the pills, some as large as small cough drops, wash them down with a tiny paper cup of water, and open my mouth wide to confirm to my caretaker that I had in fact swallowed every last one of them. Like, having to prove it. I'm sorry. Having to prove it is just insulting. Like, I don't know. Looking back, I don't recall actually having taken any medication until day 3, but I was completely drugged and had to be getting them from somewhere. It was official. I was in crazy prison. I couldn't think or speak anymore. My freedoms were stripped along with my clothes. I wore a brown, oversized uniform, much like you would see a convict wear in a supermax facility. The food was slop. The showers were timed and cold. God, I don't remember all of that. I do now, like... It's coming back. I had forgotten all of this. I really have processed my way through all of this. And so don't think that I'm like still traumatized by this whole thing, because I really have made my peace with the horror of this experience. The showers were timed and cold. The drink options were water or black coffee, because caffeine is good in this case somehow, right? So stupid. I saw others with juice, but wasn't given that option and completely rejected when I asked about it. I was left completely and utterly humiliated. Anonymous. To have someone understand your mind is a different kind of intimacy. On day 2, I even went so far as to write a mock suicide note, another twisted problem-solving attempt in an effort to get someone's attention, anyone's attention. By attention, I didn't mean eye contact, but rather their full, real, authentic attention equipped with a listener's ear. After writing pages and pages in this suicide note, during office hours that day, I knocked on the side door of the partition desk, reached out to hand my note to the very well-dressed random woman that answered. I went to give her my multi-page letter and stated in a matter of fact, "This is my suicide note." See, she instantly retracted and acted like I was handing her a venomous snake. Someone behind her stepped forward, thanked me with a smile, grabbed the note, apologized to the fine woman, and closed the door in my face. That was the end of that story. I remember this. Never addressed again. My husband later told me that he saw my letter and knew exactly what I was trying to achieve by writing it. When somebody, when somebody knows you that well, I believe him. I still believe him. He knows me that well. He knew where I was, even when I didn't. Like, he knew who I was before I ever even knew. I'm so sorry, guys. I want to get through this, without just being an absolute mess, but, sometimes life is messy. He knew exactly what I was trying to achieve by writing it. No one will ever know how much that honestly means to me. By my inquisitorial nature, I asked myself where the actual care for my mind and well-being was. As the hours went by, it became apparent that the comfort I was seeking was never within these walls to begin with. The way in which I was discounted was a new sensation to me, a remarkably insensitive one. I was out of options. What else was I to do? I gave in, and surrendered myself to the mercilessness of this establishment. The desire for care was not going to be met. I had to come to grips with that. This one, anonymous, may sound familiar. Self-care isn't selfish. I've been saying that apparently for a long time now. On day 3, I was assigned a security guard as I was considered a danger to myself and others. I remember this. I assume in response to my lame suicide note. I remember telling him that I needed help, and he seemed to actually care about that fact, if only a little. Because of that shred of care, I expressed to him that I wanted to ask him some questions, and no matter what I asked, I truly needed him to respond with one phrase. I will. He very cautiously approved. I tried diligently not to overstep the second act of kindness I was being given 72 hours after my arrival. The clarity of my mind was still very hazy, but seemingly adapting to my drugged state slowly. I asked him a dozen basic needs questions like, will you listen? Will you sit with me? Will you walk with me around the halls? Will you let me get some juice? To every question I asked, he responded with the words, I will. And he honored every single one of my requests. I know this sounds somewhat demanding on my part, but after the neglect I'd already received, I felt I was due some compassion, even at the cost of somewhat negotiating with a security guard. Even in my psychosis, I didn't think this was an unreasonable request. Outside of my psychosis, I still don't, especially when I think about how unreasonable I had been leading up to that point. Each inquiry I threw at him was simple and valid, and if I was ever going to get out of this hellhole, I needed to attempt to be heard by somebody, and it didn't matter who. I now know that this was my first logical way of thinking since I walked through those hospital doors. Every time I say hospital in here, it's in quotes, because I do not consider it a hospital. I got more care and treatment from a security guard than I did from the staff. The way in which he honored me is still a surprise. I forgot about this. You need another box of tissues. Day 3 was Easter. I'm going to read the quote above this. I was going to leave it out, but Easter is a thing for me, and I get into it a little bit here. So I'm just going to read it. Anonymous, you are safer with God in the middle of a storm than you are anywhere else without him. Day 3 was Easter. As a Christian, this was very tough for me. Not only was I not getting to celebrate Easter in a church or with my family, but I was stuck in this mental hamster wheel, 33 years old, feeling punished, scorned, and condemned. You don't have to be a super religious individual to see the irony that particular holiday and circumstance held for me. Instead of a worship service or a beautifully set table with delicious food, surrounded by friends and family, I sat at a large round game table with 5 or 6 mental patients coloring pictures of Easter bunnies and Easter eggs out of coloring books designed for 4-year-olds. This was not my idea of honoring the sacrifice my Savior made on my behalf, but he never forsaken me, and I never did lose sight of that. Anonymous, strength is what we gain from the madness we survive. This was also the day that I first recall being asked to participate in group discussions and counseling sessions. The counselor I had for the first meeting was all right, just all right. He was a soft-spoken, late 30s, well-dressed, well-groomed man with a clipboard who at least attempted to listen to the patients he was trying to care for. He introduced himself as a psychologist and carried himself in a way that suggested that he had at least some knowledge on the subject. His soft-spoken disposition came across as insecure to me, and his approach with the patients seemed very unproductive. I, on the other hand, wasn't feeling very chatty anymore after what I had already been through with this place and figured it might be best to just lay low. Every effort I had made since my arrival had only landed me worse off, so shutting up seemed like a good option. This, of course, backfired for me as it came across as an unwillingness to participate in these discussions. I remember him telling me that I needed to try. I just couldn't do anything right, it seemed. Oh, this one's not anonymous. Emily Autumn. You, he said, are a terribly real thing in a terribly false world, and that, I believe, is why you are in so much pain. Oh, we'll just go for a couple more minutes. I'm about halfway through now, so it'd be a good place to kind of wrap it up for the day and go do something more fun. On day 4, I had to participate in the group discussions with a different counselor. She couldn't have been more than 25 years old. Now remember, if this was almost 9 years ago, I would have been 33. 33. She couldn't have been more than 25 years old, wore jeans and a t-shirt, hair in a sloppy bun, and just being around her personality was brutal. She was an obnoxious, entitled, bratty young woman with an obvious chip on her shoulder and clearly no clue or insight of how to deal with the real struggles these people were facing. I would go so far as to say this girl, not woman, likely had a high school diploma at best. The only help this she-devil counselor offered, both in and out of group sessions, were the regurgitated words she read from her clipboard and noted with a pen. From what I gathered from my time with her, I believe 100% that she was newly employed at this facility, likely her first, and being trained as a counselor only within the walls of this hospital with no prior education or training in the field of psychology or psychiatry. If this wasn't the case, then she was just blatantly failing at her career. You didn't need to be sane to see it. Ouch. And I remember her. And I remember thinking that. And I still think that. She was completely unqualified. And I mean, I know that I was a mess. But I didn't need to be sane to know that about her. This one's not anonymous either. Shannon L. Alder. You will face your greatest opposition when you are closest to your biggest miracle. The issues these patients were dealing with were alarming. Let's just say in comparison, mine looked like a walk in the park next to some. One of the older men staying there constantly, and I mean constantly, talked and mumbled to himself. I assume he was homeless and had no other way of keeping a roof over his head aside from losing his mind. He approached me when I first arrived, but I was so out of sorts that I didn't even notice the severity of his problems at the time, as I was a head case myself. It wasn't until the morning of day 4, while in group, that I saw the disaster that he was. The last time he approached me, I raised my voice at him, repeated his name a dozen times to get his attention, and barked, "You cannot talk to me," several times. I don't know how he took it, but I meant it absolutely literally. That was my last encounter with him. I think I still remember his name. Maria Robinson. Nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. On the afternoon of day 4, I was moved to a different building and was assigned a new psychiatrist. A middle-aged woman I only recall meeting, but never actually talking with. All I remember, aside from her blonde hair and older age, was that she constantly carried around an armful of folders wherever she went. This was my first of 2 meetings I would have with her, and I was sufficiently unimpressed. This new location was considered a women's division of what I assumed to be less crazy individuals. However, it wasn't much better. The doors still locked from the outside, but at least I was able to watch movies with the other patients. There was definitely more of a sense of relaxed liveliness and legitimacy about this space and these people, but the mandatory pill poppings, terrible meals, and time showers all continued, along with observed sleeps, mandatory group activities, discussions, and exercises. I don't know if I mentioned it in here, but I said observed sleeps twice because I know that, because I actually pretended to sleep. So I saw somebody at the door with a clipboard, like checking off who was sleeping. Mandatory group activities, discussions, and exercises. And when I say exercises, I don't mean the cardiovascular kind. I was going on day 5 and wasn't allowed a razor to shave myself. Sorry. And wasn't allowed a razor to shave myself. My fingernails were getting long and breaking because I wasn't allowed to groom them. I wasn't allowed much shampoo, so my hair was a disaster, so much that I remember just tying the bangs back with several tiny rubber bands. The humiliation was definitely getting worse. It was here where the problem of my laceless shoes falling off my feet was finally addressed, as a janitor used zip ties to lace them up. A good solution? No. Comfortable? No. Shoes staying on? Yes. I finally figured out that to get out of here, I had to start playing their games and abiding by their ridiculous rules. Even though I was still very over-medicated, my brain was beginning to adapt to it, and I was feeling like I could actually make a valiant attempt at falsifying my way out of here. My 72-hour hold had long expired, and I needed to be freed. Out of options yet again, I started my act, this time with much better mental faculties. Playing by their rules meant that I needed to sleep when they told me, or at least pretend to when they walked into my room while noting their clipboards upon observing me. I barely opened my eyes to watch them both nights as they stood in my doorway for several minutes. I also needed to wake up when they told me, even if that meant I had to drink a gallon of coffee and smoke a billion cigarettes to do it, and I'm not a fan of that kind of help. Apparently, caffeine and cigarettes are allowed in psychiatric hospitals and easily available to people who already struggle with severe anxiety issues. This aspect made zero sense to me then. It makes zero sense to me still. And I will say right now, I agree with this 7 years later. I attempted to marginally chime in during group discussions, saying the right words, not the morally correct answers. Nuts and bolts. I knew that participating for my release meant feigning 100% of my interest to get out of this mental maze I was trapped in, especially as I wasn't being offered the sincere help I was seeking, but rather loads and loads of empty words and fruitless exercises. And no one was truly listening or caring from the beginning anyway. I figured they'd never notice if I was faking my way through. It's not as though they had learned who I was since I walked through the doors. Ah! Bing! I could have pretended to be a different person altogether and no one would have blinked an eye. Fight or flight, right? I made my choice. Okay, I will start with the anonymous quote here. This is where I'm going to pick it up. Oh, I was just looking at this. It's 78 pages long in a Word document at the size font that I used. And we're on page 49. So I think dropping 2 today, because I kind of got interrupted, that's a great way to go. I think that, I'm a little over halfway now. This is great. This is a great way to do this. So the next anonymous quote to lead off into this starts day 5, okay? So the next anonymous quote, you don't have to control your thoughts. You just have to stop letting them control you. We're just going to end off there. I'm sorry for the throat clearing and the tears falling and the bouncing of the screen, but, whatever. You just do what you can when you can, and that's what I'm doing. I hope you'll stick along, for the rest of the story. It's an experience to read it this many years after I wrote the thing and to put it out this way. Like, how cool is, I don't know. It's just, I feel like it's a good thing. And I feel like I'm going to work through some things that I might need to have worked through and read this, prior to now. But I think if I had read it and had these tears and had these moments and then read it again, like, it just wouldn't have, impacted all of us the same way. I think that this is partly with this channel. I want to be real and raw, and I don't want to like prepare myself for everything that's going to come during one of these videos, because I feel like then that's, like, it's part of the beauty of YouTube is you can just do it the way you want it. And I want to do it this way. So thank you guys for sticking with me today through the tears and some of the sadnesses. And, but I really am, like, it's amazing. I look back and I've come such a long way since I wrote that. Like, I love that I've worked so hard to get to such a better place. Like, I feel there's no going back. There's no going back. I just like applause for that. There's no going back. All right, you guys have a fantastic weekend. I plan on dropping these tonight. I'm going to watch them and make sure that I feel like they're good to go. But have a fantastic weekend, and thanks for sticking with me, and stay tuned. There's about a little less than halfway to go with this. I guess it's kind of a memoir of this experience. So stay tuned, and appreciate y'all being here, and we'll talk to you next time.